I have been the healer of Coll's Crossing for 22 years. My name is Maren Thaw. I keep the herb garden on the south side of the mill road. I run the clinic twice a week, and I know every person in this valley by name, by history, and by what ailments they are too stubborn to mention to me directly. I am telling this story because I was present for all of it, and because I think the people of this valley deserve to have it written down honestly, including the parts that do not reflect well on us at the beginning. When Roen Aldworth came back from his 3-year posting at the Grethwood Trade Corridor, he brought 2 things: a healed leg that had been badly set and reset by a surgeon at Portside, and an orc woman named Sorva. He did not announce her coming. He simply arrived at the gate of his family's farm with her beside him, and introduced her to his mother as the person who had been his interpreter and traveling companion for 2 years. Sorva was tall, not as tall as some of the Highland clan orcs, but well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, with the deep gray-green skin of the Eastern Corridor families. Her hair was dark and worn in a single braid down her back. She had the careful stillness of someone who had arrived in a great many new places and was very good at reading rooms. Her standard was as clean as mine. The valley's response was what you might expect, and I do not describe it with pride. There were 7 households in Coll's Crossing proper, and the outlying farms brought the total to about 42 families. The majority were what I would call cautiously reserved. They did not say anything terrible, but they said very little at all, which in a community this small is a message that lands clearly. 2 families were openly uncomfortable, in the way that discomfort expresses itself as busy conversation about nothing whenever you come near. One family, the Aldworths, was welcoming without reservation, which was notable but not surprising, since the Aldworths have always been the kind of people who reserve judgment for facts. The fact that began to shift things was Sorva's hands. I will say first that Sorva did not present herself as anything in particular. She helped on the Aldworth farm. She was quiet. She was scrupulously polite, which is to say she was more polite than the people who were uncomfortable with her, which I think she was aware of, and which she handled with more grace than I would have managed. About 3 weeks after her arrival, I was coming down the mill road from a late house call when I found her at the gate of the Parsen farm, talking to old Davan Parsen, who was sitting on his fence post, with his right hand wrapped in a cloth and his expression set in the stubborn "I am fine" arrangement that I recognized from 20 years of failing to treat his problems early enough. He had been cutting fence posts, and the adze had slipped. It was a clean cut but deep, and he had wrapped it with the nearest cloth available, which was not clean. He was waiting for morning to come to the clinic. Sorva had already seen it. I watched from 50 meters as she asked, with Davan's reluctant permission, to look at the hand. She examined it with a precision that I recognized immediately as someone who had done clinical assessment work before. She told him, I was close enough to hear by then, that the cut needed to be cleaned correctly before it was bound, that the cloth would need to come off, and the wound needed irrigation, and that the morning was too long to wait. She told him that the Aldworth farm had a clean water cistern, and that she could walk him there, or she could go ahead and bring a kit back, whichever he preferred. He looked at her for a long moment, then he said, I'll walk. She cleaned and bound the hand at the Aldworth yard, and did it correctly enough that when I examined the wound 2 days later it had begun a clean healing without any sign of infection, which is not what you get when you improvise a dressing in a hurry. I asked Sorva that same day what her training was. She said she had been posted to a Grethwood clan field station for 3 years before the trade corridor work. She had done triage and wound care. She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone mentions something that belongs on a record. I said, would you be willing to help me on clinic days? She said she would need to think about it. She came to me 2 days later and said yes. I want to be precise about what happened in the clinic over the next months, because I do not want to make it sound simpler than it was. There were people in the valley who came to the clinic on Tuesday and did not come back on Thursday when Sorva was there. There were people who came and were awkward and left quickly. There were people who came because of Davan's hand, which became a story that traveled the valley faster than I expected, not embellished, just, she fixed Parsen's hand in the Aldworth yard without making a fuss about it. By the 4th month, the clinic Tuesday and Thursday attendance was more or less even. By the 7th month, I had 3 people who specifically asked for Sorva's assessment on herb source treatments because she had a knowledge base for the Eastern Corridor, medicinal plants that I did not have, and that proved effective for two particular recurring conditions in the valley that I had been treating imperfectly for years. The Parsen family, Davan and his wife Ilsa, and their two grown sons became what I would describe as quietly invested in her well-being. Nothing dramatic. They brought a jar of honey to the clinic in November. They asked after her by name when they came in. By the following spring, when Roen asked the valley's families to witness their handfasting, I counted 31 families in attendance. 31 out of 42 is not unanimous, but it is a majority. And in my experience, a majority that shows up to something like that is telling you the truth about itself. I stood at the back and watched Sorva in a dark green dress that Ilsa Parsen had helped her with, talking to the valley's children, who had arrived at the conclusion that she was interesting and had organized themselves into a cluster near her feet. She was showing them something, a knot, I think, from the look of her hands, and they were trying to imitate it. Roen was standing next to his mother. His mother was watching Sorva with the expression of a woman who had been right about a person from the beginning and was taking quiet satisfaction in it. I went home that evening and wrote in my clinic record, the handfasting of Roen Aldworth and Sorva, Eastern Corridor, late spring, attendance, 31 families. Notes: Sorva treated 2 cases at the clinic this morning before the ceremony. She does not stop working. That last part is important. Throughout everything, the reserve, the discomfort, the cautious recalibration, the slow and imperfect opening, she simply kept working. She kept showing up. She was never unkind to anyone in this valley who was not unkind to her first, and several who were. I have been a healer here for 22 years, and I have rarely seen that quality in a person. The patience of someone who does not require the world to be ready for them. The steadiness of someone who builds trust by being exactly who they are, one correct bandage at a time. I am glad she is here. The valley is better for it. That is the honest record, and I wanted it written down.